Every day we learn a new story about the atrocities that the Palestinians committed in their assault on Israel, in their slaughter of October 7th. And every day the Biden administration adds a new demand to their list, their ever-expanding list to curtail Israel's operational freedom in Gaza and ability to achieve its war aims. I'll have information about both of these things and a lot more coming up on In Focus. Every day we learn something else that happened on October 7th, and everything seems unbelievable, impossible. This morning we woke up to the news that one family whose home was invaded on October 7th suffered the following fate. The terrorists came into their house from Gaza. They murdered the father, they shot him to death. They turned on the oven to full heat. When it was piping hot, they threw in the baby. And while the baby screamed in agony and was burned alive, they took the mother, and they raped her over and over and over, laughing the whole time as she was brutalized to the sound of her baby's shrieks as he was burned alive. That was just one family. And you know how we know it? We know it because it came out in a speech by the head of Zaka to one of the first rescue teams to the Republican Jewish coalition yesterday in Las Vegas. And every time there's a new story and we relive the trauma again, but we simply can't imagine, we, humanity, that this happened in Israel in 2023. This is, as Victor Davis Hansen said on my show last week, this is pre-civilizational barbarism. This is something that nobody ever anticipated seeing in our lifetimes because nobody's ever seen this before anywhere. But here it is. It happened in Israel. They cooked a child to death. As odd as it sounds, or as ironic as it sounds, the bloodlust, the savagery of the Palestinians from Gaza may have actually saved the state of Israel. Because as military strategist Yair Ansbacher said, he explained this week in an online analysis that he made, so the actual war plan was that Hamas and Hezbollah were supposed to attack simultaneously. This was Iran's plan to destroy Israel. They were both supposed to penetrate with thousands of terrorists into Israel from the north and from the south, slaughter, but move on. And they were supposed to seize enough control over southern and northern Israel to paralyze the IDF for weeks. So in the south, they're supposed to take over just about areas that cover all of the Israel Air Force's bases, major airfields. Same thing in the north, a Dimona nuclear reactor also in the south, and block the IDF from mobilizing at the same time that they have hundreds, if not thousands, of hostages in Lebanon on the north and in Gaza in the south, and they've killed thousands and thousands of Israeli civilians. So that would be a strategic assault against Israel that could level the country. And that was the Iranian plan, to defeat Israel in one day through this coordinated massacre. And in the end, why didn't it happen? It didn't happen for two reasons. It didn't happen because Hamas jumped the gun. They jumped the gun because they had this Nova musical festival along the border, and they knew that thousands of young people were going to come in, and the tantalizing prospect of mass rape of young Israeli women and of mass murder of young Israeli revelers, partygoers at the music festival was like a raw steak in front of a lion's den. They just couldn't resist the temptation. So it was their bloodlust that made them jump the gun. They jumped the gun, and it wasn't just that they jumped the gun that they came too early and that Hezbollah didn't do it simultaneously, but also that they got stuck. They were supposed to progress to military bases far away from the Gaza border. They were supposed to take it, leave people behind, and then keep going, but they didn't. They stayed in these communities to burn and decapitate children and rape their mothers and murder their fathers and take people hostage to Gaza, because they were so excited to be doing this. They were so happy that they forgot their strategic objective. So as they were murdering these Israeli civilians, they were confronted first by first responders, by these companies, by these readiness companies in the communities, and by Israeli soldiers who just came out of their own volition from these various commando squads that were able to stop them in their tracks, block them from proceeding, so that over 1,000 of these mass murderers were actually killed in Israel, and which is the majority of the force. We killed most of them. Our heroes did, on the ground on the front lawns of their homes, and then the warriors who came as soon as they heard the news to help with the defense. And it took the army, the real army, several hours to get its head together and come and do the work that they were supposed to be doing, starting at 6:30 in the morning. So the valor, the incredible courage of the civilians and of the commandos who came down were able to stop them because they were stuck in place due to their bloodlust, due to their desire, their priority that they put on slaughtering Jews over defeating Israel. So this was a miracle in a crazy, horrible, twisted way. The fact that they're such murderers, that the jihad is their soul, that what they want to do is just kill and kill and slaughter and slaughter and slaughter in the most heinous, sadistic ways possible, may very well have saved the state of Israel from annihilation on October 7th. We're finding this out from this speech there, video footage released by the IDF to foreign reporters there. But the Palestinians have known this all along, because the footage of all of these crimes against humanity, all of these secret acts of genocide, were posted by Hamas terrorists as they were doing it from their GoPro cameras on Hamas Telegram channels, so that the Palestinians have known this all along, and nobody recoiled from it. They all support it, all of them. And we see not only in Gaza, but also in Judea and Samaria, under the ostensibly moderate American-financed Palestinian Authority, which also receives American arms and whose forces are trained by the United States and by Europe. You've seen mass parades, marches throughout all of the major Palestinian cities and villages in Judea and Samaria, calling for jihad and saying we are all Hamas. On Friday, one of these marches in Ramallah was broadcast, and what were they shouting? There's thousands and thousands of people, and just so you know, Ramallah is the ostensible capital of the Palestinian Authority. That's where PA President Mahmoud Abbas resides. That's where the headquarters are of the Palestinian Authority. Its government offices are all in Ramallah. So that's the seat of power of the Palestinian Authority. And you have thousands of people walking through the streets, marching through the streets of Ramallah, and they're chanting the following. They're saying, if you're hiding a rifle in your closet to shoot off at a wedding, because that's what they do, they shoot off rifles at their weddings. If you're hiding a rifle in your closet to shoot off at weddings, use it to kill a Jew or hand it over to Hamas. They're shouting it. This is a slogan that they're saying, chanting over and over again as they parade through the streets. Use your rifle to shoot a Jew or give it to Hamas, which will shoot the Jews for you. So that's what they're marching, and that's what they're saying. And it's not just, the mob that's doing this. It's the Palestinian Authority that's doing. The Palestinian Authority, their top religious authority, is this man named Mahmoud al-Khabash. Mahmoud al-Khabash is the chief Sharia judge. He's a religious affairs minister. He's Abbas's, I'm just reading, advisor on religious affairs and Islamic relations. And over the weekend, the same Khabash was at an Islamic conference on fatwas, Islamic judgments, in Egypt. And it was there that he gave this statement where he said that Mahmoud Abbas, again, the supposed moderate that U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken met with when he was here in the region, and President Biden was supposed to meet with when he was here visiting Israel, but Abbas refused to meet with President Biden, along with King Abdullah of Jordan and President al-Sisi of Egypt, all claiming they couldn't possibly meet with the President of the United States because they were falsely accusing Israel of bombing a hospital in Gaza. So they dissed the President of the United States. All the same, President Biden continues to support Abbas, and he wants to give him a state after the war. We'll get to that in a second. What Abbas's religious advisor said, he said that Abbas, again, the one who's supported by Biden, by President Biden himself, he called him the commander of the jihad fighters. He's the commander of the jihad fighters. It's not just that he supports Hamas, he commands Hamas. He further stressed that the conflict with Israel is religious. I'm reading from Palestinian Media Watch's website. They have all the documentation. So Mahmoud al-Khabash named Abbas the commander of the jihadi forces, and he further stressed the conflict with Israel is religious, stating that the Palestinian cause is not only of land and border, so it's not a territorial dispute only, it's also, quote, a religious cause and a cause of faith. This is a religious writ. You have to annihilate the Jews. And this is after, they gave instructions to all the Palestinian mosques to tell all worshipers on Friday that they have to seek the annihilation of the Jews. You have marches. You have Abbas's top advisors saying this is a religious war and a duty to fight it. All the same, again, the Biden administration continues to say, let's give these people a state. Last Wednesday, at a press conference with Australian Prime Minister Albanese, Biden said that the end of this war is a two-state solution right there. And, that the Hamas doesn't represent anybody. Well, it works out, again, that not only does Hamas represent the Palestinians who are all celebrating the slaughter of 1,400, 1,500 Jews and the capture of another 239 who are now hostages in Gaza. And there are 400 still unaccounted for. They also are saying that the PLO, the PA is also saying, we're leading this jihad. We love this jihad. It's everybody's religious duty. And our leader, Mahmoud Abbas, is the head of this jihad. So Hamas absolutely represents the Palestinians. Palestinians themselves are saying so. But rather than accept this truth, because if you want to have a Palestinian state, then they can't possibly be all jihadists, which is what they are. So you'd have to blame the Jews. So Biden came out with this statement that's been echoed by Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken and other top level officials of the Biden administration, accusing extremist settlers, that's Jews, who live in Judea and Samaria, of pouring gasoline on the fire and that they have to be punished. But right after he said this on Wednesday, Thursday morning, you had, as if on cue, or maybe on cue, you had a mob of Palestinians in the Benjamin region of Judea and Samaria. It's between Judea and Samaria. And they beset two Jewish shepherds who were with their sheep outside of their village of Rimonim. And one of them was critically wounded and the other one was moderately wounded. So they're attacking the Jews right after Biden said that the Jews slandered the Jews and said that they were extremist settlers who were pouring gasoline on the fire. And then on Saturday, you had an incredible thing, which is that there was this Jewish family. One of the sons was on furlough from the IDF, where he's serving in the north by the Lebanon border, and he came home for Shabbat. And he and his father and two younger brothers are walking in an orchard that they own, and they're beset by a mob of Palestinians wielding axes and threatening to kill them. And the soldier on furlough shot in the air, and one of the members of the mob was killed. At this guy's funeral, they were all saying that they were with Hamas and that they all were loyal soldiers of Hamas leader Mohammed Def. Okay, so these are Hamas people who are going to lynch a Jewish family who was walking in its orchard on Shabbat. But since it's Shabbat, who's going to talk? And actually, the head of the Samaria Regional Council, Yossi Dagan, got a rabbinical permission to say what had actually happened before it became a complete blood libel, before Shabbat was over. All the same, right, this poor soldier who was just defending his family was interrogated by the Shabbat for 2 days under American pressure, and now he's been arrested. For what? For trying to defend his family from being lynched. It's all crazy, but it's all American pressure. Because after all, it's extremist settlers who refuse to be lynched. Now, the IDF and the government are laudably completely unified in their commitment to achieving the aims of the war as stipulated by the War Cabinet, which are to annihilate Hamas's military capabilities and its regime capabilities in Gaza. But there are a couple of things that we have to understand. When we look at the society operating on that spawned Hamas, that supports Hamas, whether in Gaza or in Judea and Samaria, we understand that what they're motivated by more than guns is jihadist ideology. And the only way that you can defeat these forces, because we know that everything that they've received, they've used for jihad. We build our families, we save our money, we buy homes, we send our kids to school, we send them to after-school activities, we raise them to be responsible adults, to value life, to love their families, to love their country. These people have spent the last 3 decades teaching their children to hate Jews and seek our annihilation, already beginning at the age of 2. And they've been training them in firearms since they were in preschool. And that's all they've built. They've built a jihadist society. And you don't defeat this just by, dismantling a regime. The way that you defeat a jihadist society also is not by giving them stuff, by making them prosperous, because they've become prosperous under Israel, but they've just used all the prosperity that they've received in order to enable them to further conduct acts of jihad and wage their holy war against the Jews. So what you have to do is recognize this and understand that in order to actually win, it's not about nation building. Like that's the failed American experiment as well in Iraq and in Afghanistan, but it's destroying hope. It's annihilating their capacity, even minimally, to carry out acts of jihad against your society. That has to be the war aim. And it's not just in Gaza, it's also in Judea and Samaria, because what the Americans are saying is we want to empower the jihadists in this area, right, under Abbas, who is the leader of the jihad according to his own religious affairs advisors and according to him himself. Right, he has called openly for the annihilation of Israel. He spews anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and epithets all the time. He's a jihadist as well, even if he doesn't have a long beard. This is what he and the PLO have always aspired to. Just read their charter. It's indistinguishable from Hamas. At any rate, you can't say that the solution or you get a victory against this jihadist society by going after one aspect of it in one place. It's important to achieve the war goals, but in order to actually protect Israel and ensure our survival, we have to recognize that we simply cannot allow any more armed forces west of the Jordan River that are not Israeli armed forces. Not Palestinian security services, not Palestinian intelligence services, not Palestinian police services. All of them are jihadists. All of them are training under a doctrine of jihad to kill Jews. And we have to recognize this and put an end to it, which means we have to put an end to the fake two-state solution. Because it's not just Hamas in Gaza. It's the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria. They both are unified in their aspiration and their operational goal of annihilating Israel and of killing as many Jews as possible. That's why Palestinian security forces are also engaged and have been continuously engaged in acts of terrorism and in cooperation with Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. When they're small, they conduct small massacres. When they're big, they invade your country and they put your babies in the oven. And that you have to understand. So we need them to be disarmed. That has to be the war goal. But we have a problem, though, which is the Biden administration. The Biden administration, from the outset, has been making it clear that they don't want Israel to either defeat Hamas as a military organization or as a regime. On the one hand, they certainly, not only do they not support the end of the two-state solution and the disarmament of the PA, they want the PA to be empowered, which is why they're attacking and demonizing and slandering Israeli Jews who live in Judea and Samaria. From the outset, while people were still being burned, you had the Biden administration saying, and then prior President Biden the next day saying that Israel is expected to operate in accordance with the rules of war, which of course we are. Just by saying it, it's gaslighting. It's just a slander, as if just in case, you weren't sure. Well, we expected. The fact that Israel always operates in accordance with the rules of war doesn't matter. They're saying it because they wanted out their moral equivalence from the outset. From the outset. while paramedics are pouring water on burning corpses to try to put them out so that they'll be identifiable. Okay? That's what's happening. But from the outset, the United States was engaging in this moral equivalency and gaslighting against Israel. And that immediately or very quickly morphed into a demand for humanitarian aid. Now just think about that for a second. Hamas has hoarded supplies, fuel, water, food for, they're saying, months of warfare against Israel. So if anybody's lacking anything, the first address to go to is their own regime, Hamas. People are hungry, then they should go to their leaders. They elected them and demand food. Why are they coming to Israel? The second place that they should be going, of course, is Egypt. If you want to escape a war zone, go to a neighboring country. Now, you're not going to come to Israel because you're at war with Israel. Across the border into the Sinai, you have plenty of countries, almost every UN member nation refused to vote in favor or voted in favor of a resolution condemning Israel or GA this week. Why don't they take in refugees from Gaza to prevent a humanitarian disaster, which apparently they care about so deeply? Why don't they take them in? See, the president of Egypt, he owes his regime to Israel because Israel supported him when he ousted the Muslim Brotherhood regime in 2013, and because Israel helped him, actively supported his military efforts to defeat ISIS in the Sinai Peninsula 3 years ago. He wouldn't be here if Israel hadn't helped him. And instead of standing with Israel now, he's engaging in these same Islamic anti-Semitic conspiracy theories against Israel. And he's saying nobody's allowed into the Sinai, not even to traverse the Sinai. I mean, he's so extreme that there are like 400, 500 or so American citizens at the border between Gaza and Egypt, and he's refusing to allow them to transit his territory to go to the United States. So, I mean, this is Sisi. He is the answer. He's the solution. And this brings us to the Biden administration. The Biden administration absolutely knows this. But instead of threatening Sisi, who receives billions of dollars in American military assistance and economic assistance every day, instead of going to the Arab ambassadors in Washington and saying to them, look, Qatar, look, Turkey, Turkey, NATO ally Turkey Erdogan just spoke to 1 million people in Istanbul, cursed Israel, supported Hamas, cursed the Jews, right? Supports genocide. He's a NATO ally. Why doesn't the United States say, okay, you want to stay in NATO? Take the Gazans. Prevent a humanitarian disaster in Gaza. But no, instead of doing that, the Biden administration is putting all of the pressure on Israel to solve the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which itself is probably a lie. And anyway, they brought it on themselves. Why is it Israel's problem? I mean, they started talking about a humanitarian crisis in Gaza literally 24 hours after the October 7th slaughter. What is this? Why do you have, after 24 hours, a humanitarian crisis? What does that even mean? Define crisis. I think a humanitarian crisis is the fact that they have 239 innocent hostages being used as bargaining chips by mass murderers who seek the annihilation of the Jewish people as a form of psychological warfare that's simply obscene. That's the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and the fact that they don't seem to be able to recognize this in the Biden administration is really supposed to be alarming, right? But they're saying that all additional support for Israel, it's all contingent. Biden talked to Bibi for the umpteenth time, Prime Minister Netanyahu, last night, again, demanding a massive expansion of the number of trucks going into Gaza. And the United States knows full well that all they're asking for, all they're demanding is massive resupply of Hamas. They know it. They know that all of the trucks that go in there, topped off with fuel. They cross the border and all the fuel is siphoned off by Hamas terrorists and it's used by them. They know that all of the flour and the water and the medicines that are coming in these trucks are then sold in market. They're all stolen from the UN, which isn't really holding it as like an independent organization, because 90% of UN employees in Gaza are also Hamas members. So the whole thing is a lie. The U.S. government is absolutely aware of this fact, and they don't care. And now, and then two more new things this week. So on Friday night, Israel launches ground operation into Gaza, right? We send in our tanks, we send in engineers, we send in infantry, and God willing, they'll continue to do with the great work that they're doing now, and they'll move from strength to strength, and we'll see, victory very soon with the total annihilation of Hamas, God willing. And we're all praying for them night and day, right? But in order to enable the success of this operation, first thing that Israel did as the troops were entering into this jihadist nest, right, is they blocked all communications in Gaza. Smart, right? Very, very smart. Very good. Finally, we're getting something out of our technological edge here. Great. Don't let them communicate with one another, right? Don't let them spew their lies to the outside world. Stop it. Just a blanket a blackout of communications from Gaza. That's great. That's exactly what you should be doing from an operational level. But then, of course, all of the pro-genocide people who support Hamas in the AP and the AFP and all of these other places, oh, these poor things, we don't know what's happening. It's terrible. How are we supposed to attack Israel without communications of slanders and libels coming from the fake Gaza Health Ministry, which is controlled by Hamas, right? So they're screaming. And what does the Biden administration do? It demands that Israel restore communications so that the Hamas terrorists can communicate with one another, can communicate with the propaganda arms abroad, and so on and so forth, can communicate with Iran, can communicate with Hezbollah. This is Biden's demand, that we restore communications to these terrorists who burn babies alive and gang rape their mothers. That's his demand. He's demanding restoration of communications in Gaza. And then the last thing, which is amazing, was this morning I read the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, now has joined the call of AOC and Ilhan Omar and the whole Hamas caucus in the Democrat Party. He wants a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. This is right out of the Obama administration's playbook from the 2014 War Operation Protective Edge, right? This is what they demanded. This was Jen Psaki screaming at Israel because, we bombed an UNRWA clinic, which was booby-trapped, and 3 of our soldiers were killed going into it because it was booby-trapped, right? But we're evil because we bombed this military installation that was built on a UN clinic. The same thing with their schools. So we get condemned by Obama's White House spokesperson, and they demanded a humanitarian ceasefire. And so Israel had to bow to American pressure, right? Because and during that humanitarian ceasefire in 2014, when we're abiding by it because we're dumb, right? Hamas came in and started out of a tunnel, and they started shooting at Givati soldiers who were on the ground in Gaza, and they killed Hadar Golden, and they stole his body into Gaza. 9 years later, we still haven't recovered it. And that's what they did, because that's what you do in a ceasefire. You don't ceasefire. Only the suffers, the Jews, they keep it because the Americans force us to. So this humanitarian ceasefire, you're resupplying Hamas, you're ensuring their communications, and now you want them to be able to kill Israeli soldiers who are going to be sitting ducks because you're forcing us to cease fire, right? And aerial bombings. So what, you want more Israeli casualties? That's all a ceasefire is. They don't need a humanitarian ceasefire. Look at what they did to our people. And where are our hostages? How come you're giving us all these demands? Well, they're giving us all these demands because, as Victor Davis Hansen explained last week on the Caroline Glick Show, and you should all watch it if you haven't seen it yet, Biden doesn't support Israel. His administration certainly doesn't support Israel. And that puts him, right, in opposition to the vast majority of the American people who do. I wrote in my column on Friday, I cited this article by Democratic pollster Doug Schoen in the Hill. He wrote this column, and he is explaining that not only do the American people overwhelmingly support Israel, they passionately, overwhelmingly support Israel. They think that supporting Israel is the most important foreign policy priority, more important than securing the border with Mexico, more important than Ukraine, more important than Taiwan. And we're not talking about 51% of Americans or 61% of Americans. We're talking about 71% of Americans. No, yeah, 74% of Americans, 71% of Democrats, and 80-some-odd% of Republicans. So this is huge. This is 3/4 of Americans think that supporting Israel is the highest priority. And this brings us to Congress, frankly, right? Because Congress now, thank God, the Republicans finally elected their speaker, and they can actually do something now. Speaker Mike Johnson said that the Congress was going to approve the military aid that Biden requested for Israel on Thursday. I think that approval should come with no strings attached. Not only no strings attached, but say to the administration, you're not allowed to place any strings on this, so that you can't, parcel out the aid, as you give a little bit of the bombs for the Air Force now, but then make continued provision of the munitions of war that Israel needs in order to defeat Hamas, condition on Israel not winning by resupplying Hamas, by ensuring their communications, by having humanitarian ceasefires that are going to kill our soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. You're not allowed to do that. This is the aid, and we're giving it now with no strings attached. Israel has to have it, and the Biden administration has no presidential waiver to block the continued provision of the aid. I think that's one thing. Another thing that they can do is pass bipartisan resolutions. Again, the Democratic Party, you have 25% of Democrats who support Hamas, 75% of Democrats support Israel, okay? Just read my article. I have all the citations and the link to Sean's piece of The Hill in it. The Democrats support Israel. 25% of Democrats support Hamas, okay? So 75% support Israel, along with an even larger percentage of Republicans. And so you make it an overwhelmingly bipartisan resolution demanding that the administration stop pressuring Israel to resupply Hamas, or to have fake humanitarian ceasefires, and to stop interfering with Israel's operations vis-a-vis the communications in Gaza, etc. The last thing I think that's really important to do is start an investigation of Hadi Amar. Hadi Amar is the U.S. Special Representative to the Palestinian Authority, or to the Palestinians. And Hadi Amar has a long track record of supporting Hamas. In 2018, when he was a fellow at the Brookings Institute in Qatar, which is a state sponsor of Hamas, he was the lead author of a Brookings policy paper. I also talk about this on Friday, called Ending Gaza's Perpetual Crisis, a New U.S. Approach. And the new U.S. approach that Hadi Amar and his colleagues at Brookings advocated on behalf of was that the United States change terror financing laws to enable USAID to fund Hamas in Gaza through U.S. contractors. Okay, that's one of the things. He also wanted to end Israel's maritime blockade of Gaza, to give them free open control of the coastline to Gaza, which would just be a disaster. You could see Iranian and Hezbollah ships anchoring on a port, which they want Israel to allow to be built in Gaza. I mean, these are crazy things. He wants a unity government controlled by Hamas, which he acknowledges is more popular than Fatah, than the PA. He wants Hamas to join the PLO, form a unity government with Fatah that controls Gaza and Judea and Samaria. So he wants to put Hamas in charge of both. And also, since he came into office, he did all of these things practically. The Biden administration restored U.S. funding to the Palestinian Authority, which, by the way, just this month alone is going to pay $3 million to the terrorists now jailed in Israeli prisons after they took part in the slaughter on October 7th, because that's just their law. That's what they're going to do. They're going to pay them almost $3 million, $2.9 million this month. Yeah, that's what they're going to get. And that's not the pensions and the life insurance policies for the mass murders who were killed, for their families. No, this is just the people in Israeli prison now who were arrested on October 7th and 8th. Okay? And U.S. funding to the Palestinian Authority was restored, even though they're in breach of the Taylor Force Act, and they're indirectly funding Hamas through this aid, because the PA, which the United States funds Hamas regime in Gaza, etc. It was restored under Hadi Amar. He's been interfering massively with Israel's operations against Hamas and Islamic Jihad and PA terrorists in Judea and Samaria, particularly in Samaria, northern Samaria, and the towns of Shem, Nablus, and Jenin. So Hadi Amar is empowering Palestinian terrorist forces in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. This should be investigated by Congress. People should know what the Biden administration's special representative to the PLO, to the PA, to the Palestinians, Hadi Amar, is doing. It's important. It's also important for them to start pressuring el-Sisi. El-Sisi receives billions of dollars in U.S. Financial support, military support. He should be pressured by Congress. for enabling Hamas's war against Israel and enabling their doctrine of using the Palestinians of Gaza as human shields in order to coerce Israel to bow to their annihilationist demands. All of these things are doable now that you have a Republican speaker and you have such massive bipartisan support. We have to bear in mind, as Victor Davis Hansen said on the Caroline Glick Show last week, the Biden administration is out of step with the American public in their support for Hamas's war effort. They're not out of step with the pro-Hamas officials that Biden appointed to the key positions in his administration, but they are out of step with the American people. And as a repository of the people's will, most directly, the Congress is the best place to begin to put these kinds of policies under a magnifying glass. So, we're seeing the nature not only of Hamas and their atrocities, which are so stunning that you wake up in the morning and you just start the day crying every day when you see something new. And I'm not kidding. I'm not dramatizing. It's exactly what's happening. We start the day crying and try to hide our tears from our children so that they don't get scared, right? But this is what's going on. This is the enemy, and it's not just 10,000, 20,000 fighters that are hiding in tunnels in Gaza. This is a society that nurtures them, that enables them, that engenders them, that supports them, that glorifies in their acts of carnage. These people cannot be allowed to have a state. And the more information that gets out about the jihadist nature of the Palestinian society in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and unfortunately in large swaths of Israel as well, the better off we'll be, because the idea of a two-state solution, that these people should be given sovereignty over Israel's heartland, right, it is annihilationist. I mean, there's no way that you can look at that idea any longer and say that you're for both sides. You can't be for both sides, because weapons in the hands of jihadists means Jewish babies in ovens. Quite simply, we saw this. We can't unsee what we've seen, and we have to operate going forward on the basis of the reality as it's exposed itself before us. So those are my thoughts today. I'll be back with more later in the week. And also, I'm going to be talking this week with Islamic scholar Dr. Mordechai Kedar about jihad and Hamas and how we're supposed to look at this enemy that we're fighting today, and that we must defeat and deny all ability to harm us in the future. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you later this week.